It's week 36. We are on day 4, and we continue on in our journey through the book by the prophet Ezekiel, and today specifically chapters 29 through 32. Well, again, at the beginning of the week, we said that one of the themes we would see is God's judgment against the nations, the evil nations that had surrounded Israel, or Judah, as it was known at the time. And here we see specifically the oracles against Egypt. Now, Egypt has long been a neighbor and maybe, if you can say, an issue for the Israelites. Of course, we met the Egyptians way back in the book of Genesis. There, Joseph had been sold into slavery and had some misadventures until he rose to power as second in all of Egypt to oversee a time of famine. Well, it was during that famine then that his brothers, who had sold him into slavery, came looking for grain, and eventually they brought both all their families as well as their father Jacob, now known as Israel, into Egypt, where, as a result, they and their descendants lived in Egypt for about 400 years. By the end of that point, they were then in slavery. Well, even after Moses is lifted up as a leader and a savior for the people and takes them out in what we know as the Exodus and moving them even into the promised land, the nation of Israel, the empire of, or not the nation of Israel, the nation of Egypt, the empire of Egypt, has continued to have some strings, if you will, some hold on the nation of Israel and its people. It's remained a temptation. First, the idolatry, the pantheon of Egyptian gods, has wrapped up some people, and they have had their eyes and attention diverted from the one true God to the idolatry that was representative of Egypt. Also, its politics. This is a world-class empire. It has all the glories and riches and things like that, things that you might want, and so that has also been a temptation. But more particularly and more recently, in this particular instance, Egypt has been, because of its status as an empire, a source of potential partnership, if you will. And we see even a story about, I believe it's King Hezekiah. He's one of the good kings listed of Judah. He's known to be a man after God's own heart, much like his ancestor David. But one of the things that he does that does not please God is that he goes into a treaty with Egypt with the idea that Egypt will help save Judah, save Israel, if Babylon or another power would come up against them. Well, we saw that Egypt didn't save their bacon, so to speak, and God is not pleased because this king, even with a heart after God, has put his trust in the power of a human organization or kingdom rather than in God himself. Again, we do these sorts of things all the time, though we may not think of them, and they certainly aren't on the grand scheme of world politics. But how often do we put our trust in another person, in another event or activity, even perhaps, putting our money into investment plans rather than trusting that God is going to provide what we need, that God will get us through? And I'm not saying investments are bad, but sometimes we put more trust in the people that are surrounding us, the imperfect people that surround us, than in the one true God. Who are you trusting today?